A 70-year-old man died alone at sea. His wife died days later at an airport in Johannesburg before she could board the flight home. A third passenger died on May 2nd, still on the ship. And the vessel is still out there right now, with 149 people trapped inside, because no country on Earth will let them dock. This isn't a series. This is today. The ship is called MV Hondius. It left Argentina 6 weeks ago carrying passengers from 23 different countries: Dutch, British, American, German, Spanish. People with money, with time, with a dream of watching penguins in Antarctica. The kind of trip you plan for years and talk about for the rest of your life. Nobody planned for Hantavirus. And here's the detail that's keeping epidemiologists awake at night. There's a real possibility that someone boarded that ship in Argentina already carrying the virus inside. Their body, no symptoms, no idea, and spent weeks silently passing it to other passengers while the Hondius sailed through icebergs and whale pods. If that's confirmed, this becomes something medicine has never documented at this scale. A virus that lives in the Patagonian wilderness, moving from human to human in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, killing people from 3 different countries who never set foot in a field in their lives. If it holds up, the textbooks change. Travel medicine changes. The way we understand how outbreaks move through a hyperconnected world changes. In the next few minutes, you're going to know everything. Who died and how. The 2 theories scientists are working with. Why no government wants those 149 people stepping onto their soil, and the story behind this virus in Argentina that makes this case so much scarier than it looks on the surface. Stay until the end, because there's a chapter from 2019 in a Patagonian town that almost nobody outside South America is talking about, and it explains everything. The MV Hondius is a polar expedition cruiser operated by a Dutch company called Oceanwide Expeditions. Their specialty is taking people to the places most travelers never reach: Antarctica, the Falklands, remote islands scattered across the South Atlantic. On March 20th, 2026, it left the port of Ushuaia, the southernmost city in the world, with 88 passengers and 61 crew, bound for the Canary Islands via Antarctica and Cape Verde. A 35-day voyage. The greatest adventure of my life, one passenger called it before they left. What nobody knew is that something invisible was already on board. Or was about to be. The first to fall ill was a Dutch man, 70 years old. Fever, headache, fatigue, abdominal discomfort, the same early signs Hantavirus always produces, and the same symptoms that blend easily into anything else on a cold weather. Expedition cruise. The ship's doctor saw him. The ship kept moving. He died on April 11th, somewhere in the South Atlantic. His body was brought ashore at St. Helena. His wife, also Dutch, 69 years old, was sick too. She was evacuated to South Africa. She made it to the airport in Johannesburg. She collapsed before she could board the flight home. She died in a hospital in Johannesburg. 2 people who had planned that trip together, who had bought the gear, who had circled the date on the calendar. Both dead. In different countries. Thousands of miles apart. On May 2nd, a 3rd passenger died on board. German, the operating company, issued a statement saying the cause of death had not yet been determined. Very careful words, because by that point, the WHO already had the case on its radar. 6 people with serious symptoms were dead, evacuated, or actively ill, and the ship was sitting off Cape Verde, with no one quite sure what to do next. On Sunday, May 3rd, the World Health Organization went public. 3 dead. 1 case laboratory confirmed as Hantavirus. 5 more suspected. One of them, a 69-year-old British man, evacuated to Johannesburg and in critical condition in intensive care. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, The Director General himself personally released the statement. That doesn't happen for minor outbreaks. And the ship was still in the water, still unable to dock. Cape Verde was the first option. The Hondius dropped anchor off Praia, the capital, and the country's health minister was direct. No passenger would set foot on Cape Verdean soil. Public safety, national security. Local health authorities did board the ship to evaluate 2 symptomatic crew members. But the 149 inside stayed inside. Disinfection teams in the corridors. Passengers confined to cabins. The language of lockdown, this time in the middle of the ocean, on a luxury cruise that had been sold as the adventure of a lifetime. One of those passengers is Jake Rosmarin, an American travel content creator, who had boarded on April 1st, telling his followers this was the greatest adventure of his life. When news of the outbreak spread, he first posted asking for privacy. Hours later, he changed his mind. He sat in his cabin, looked straight into the camera, and his voice cracked. He said, "What's happening right now is very real for all of us here. We're not just a story. We're not just headlines. We're people. People with families, with lives, with people waiting for us at home. There's a lot of uncertainty, and that's the hardest part. All we want right now is to feel safe, to have clarity, and to get home." That's what lives behind the numbers. Behind every WHO press release and every company statement, 149 people locked on a ship, watching the horizon, not knowing when it ends. Now we need to talk about the virus. Hantavirus is carried by rodents. Mice and rats shed it in their urine, feces, and saliva. The most common route of human infection is inhalation. Disturb contaminated material, the virus becomes an invisible aerosol. It enters through the lungs. Once inside, the body has no specific defense. No antiviral drug, no vaccine. Only supportive care, oxygen, mechanical ventilation if the lungs fail, and waiting to see if the body holds on. The mortality rate in serious cases sits between 30 and 40%. 3 or 4 out of every 10 people who reach that stage don't survive. But there is one variant that changes the entire equation. It's called the Andes virus. Endemic to Argentine and Chilean Patagonia, and it has something no other hantavirus strain in the world has documented in the same way: the ability to transmit directly from person to person. To understand what that actually means, you need to go to Epidemiologists, a small town in the province of Chubut, about 870 miles from Ushuaia. Late 2018, early 2019. A full year before the world heard the word COVID-19, Epidemiologists lived its own version of what was coming. Face masks, mandatory isolation, human-to-human chains of infection. The outbreak started at a local social gathering and spread through attendees and their families. Dozens infected, 11 dead. It was the first time antivirus human-to-human transmission was operationally documented for public health. It stopped being a lab hypothesis. It became a recorded fact, with names, with dates, with traceable chains of contagion. Dr. Roberto Debog, an infectious disease specialist, told CNN, human transmission with the Andes virus is possible. And 2 of the people who died on the Hondius were husband and wife, the closest contact possible on any ship. Cardiologist Jorge Tartaglione was more direct. The Andes strain is the only hantavirus that transmits from human to human, and in a closed space like a ship, the probability of contagion is dramatically higher. Scott Miskovich, a physician and CEO of Premier Medical Group in the U.S., told CNN that when he first read the news, he assumed it was a typo. A hantavirus outbreak on a ship that hadn't traveled to any officially endemic zone simply shouldn't happen under conventional models. And yet, it happened. 2 theories, both still on the table. Theory 1, a stowaway rodent. An infected mouse could have boarded the Hondius at Ushuaia, or already been on board, hidden in the cargo hold or kitchen corners. If it contaminated surfaces, food, or the ventilation system, any exposed passenger could have been infected by inhalation. A classic Hantavirus outbreak. Same vector as always, entirely unexpected context. Theory 2 is the one keeping epidemiologists up at night. Someone already had the Andes virus when they boarded. Maybe they'd spent days beforehand hiking through Patagonia, sleeping in a mountain cabin in an area where the long-tailed mouse is common. The incubation period runs 1 to 8 weeks. The person boards with no symptoms, completely functional. While they sail toward Antarctica, the virus replicates in silence. By the time the first man starts running a fever, the contact has already happened. Shared meals, narrow hallways, recirculated air. The ideal environment. That would explain why the first victim and his wife were a couple, the closest and most prolonged contact on the entire ship. Argentine authorities in Tierra del Fuego stated the region has no confirmed hantavirus cases on record and no evidence of local rodent reservoirs. The virus, they said, didn't come from Ushuaia. That shifted attention to what happened before passengers boarded, because many arrived days early and spend time hiking through Patagonia, sleeping in remote cabins, visiting national parks that Argentina's health ministry classifies as endemic risk zones. And then, they get on the ship. Ocean-wide expeditions, for its part, released statements in careful drips. Always the language of lawyers, it has not been established that the virus is linked to the 3 deaths. The cause of the 3rd death has not yet been determined. The company that sold this as a luxury expedition to the edge of the world was now managing a crisis on the desks of the WHO and half a dozen foreign ministries. The ship was eyeing the Canary Islands as a next port, Spanish territory, European hospitals, capacity for mass testing, but getting there from Cape Verde means 2 or 3 more days of sailing. 2 or 3 more days of uncertainty. 2 or 3 more days locked on that ship, with the German man's body still on board. A ship navigating with its dead because no port will take it. Behind every headline there's something much more concrete. A Dutch couple that never made it home. A German man whose cause of death still hasn't been established. A British man. In intensive care in Johannesburg while his family watches the news from the other side of the world, and 149 people waking up every morning not knowing when it ends. The passengers of the Hondius didn't know the history. They were on an adventure cruise. The last thing on their minds was a small mouse in the Patagonian steppe. And that is exactly the point. Adventure tourism takes people from all over the world to areas where viruses have been circulating among wild animals for centuries, completely indifferent to travel itineraries. Patagonia, the Amazon, Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa. Beautiful places that no brochure describes as dangerous, because danger doesn't photograph well. What this case forces into the conversation is a question travel medicine is going to have to answer. Should there be specific protocols for cruises departing from hantavirus? Endemic zones? Should passengers be screened before boarding? Miskovich put it plainly, if the evidence points to human-to-human transmission, this will change the future of travel medicine, infectious diseases, and tropical medicine. Full stop. The WHO said no need for panic, risk to the general public is low. And technically that's right. The Andes virus requires close and prolonged contact. It won't cause a pandemic. But a pandemic was never the point. The point is that a virus that spent decades confined to Patagonian grasslands, killing people in towns most of the world can't find on a map, just showed up on an international cruise ship with passengers from 23 countries. Diseases don't carry passports. But they do use transportation, and transportation has never been faster, more global, or more connected than it is right now. The MV Hondius left port looking for the adventure at the end of the world. It found it, just not among icebergs and penguins. It found it in a fever, climbing slowly in a ship's cabin, in lungs filling with fluid, while the doctor on board did what he could with what he had. The ship is still in the Atlantic. The question epidemiologists aren't ready to answer out loud yet, whether this was person-to-person transmission in the open ocean, still has no official answer. And those 149 people, when they finally come ashore, are going to fly home. To 23 different countries, carrying weeks of exposure and in some cases possibly something else. That's what's really behind this story. Not just 3 deaths, not just 149 people trapped. An unanswered scientific question, and a virus that spent decades waiting in Patagonia for someone to carry it further. Tell me what you think in the comments. Should cruise companies have specific protocols for routes through endemic zones? If you know someone planning an expedition cruise to South America, share this video. Information doesn't create fear. It creates better decisions. Subscribe if you want to follow this as it develops. This isn't over.